I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, April 16th, 2024 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Rios, would you take the roll?
Yes. Ms. Alonso Diaz,
Here?
Ms. Campos,
Present by video.
Mr. Dix,
Here.
Ms. Knox,
Here.
Ms. Martorano,
Here.
Ms. Norris,
Here.
Mr. Mayberry Mace.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Martorano, so moved. Knox, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Martorano and a second by Ms. Knox. Board members, please cast your votes.
Norris, yes.
Campos, yes.
Dix, yes.
Mayberry Mays, yes.
The vote is approved, 7-0. The next item on our agenda is our district recognitions. Superintendent Roberts, are there any recognitions for today?
Thank you, Madam Vice. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. There are always district recognitions. However, this evening, in light of some additional important occurrences in terms of district business, we will defer and bring forward those recognitions at the next board meeting on May 7th.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the public forum followed by consent and regular agenda. We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. We also allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak during any portion of the business meeting, please email rosa.rios@dmschools.org. The same speaking protocols apply to all individuals who wish to address the board. Speakers will be called individually, and we ask they state their name and address prior to providing comments. Students and minors do not have to provide their addresses. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to the programs, services, and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. We ask all speakers to avoid references to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. The use of inappropriate language will not be tolerated, and individuals choosing to do so will be gavelled out of order and asked to excuse themselves from the premises or escorted out by security district. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in a discussion with public forum speakers, as it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters requiring attention will receive appropriate staff and our board follow-up at a time after the meeting. Thanks for your participation. We appreciate your feedback and input. Ms. Rios, do we have any speakers for the public forum?
We do, just one. I'd like to call Terry DeWeese to the podium. Okay, those are all the speakers I have signed up.
Thank you. We will now move to the consent agenda. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers informing the board's discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Rios, do we have any speakers?
No speakers.
Ms. Knox, I believe you have the consent motion.
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $5,616,288.82 and procurement transactions in the amount of $740,244.70.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Knox and a second by Ms. Martorano. Is there any discussion or does anyone have any questions? Board members, please cast your votes.
Norris, yes. Campos, yes.
Dix, yes.
Mayberry Mays, yes.
The consent items are approved. 7-0. Next on the agenda are our public hearings. First item is E1, public hearing for B9188 Brubaker and Greenwood geothermal vault replacement. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item F1? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Roberts, would you please introduce the matter?
Certainly, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by KCL Engineering for geothermal vault replacement at Brubaker and Greenwood Elementary. Hold a public hearing and approve the plans.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item E1?
Martirano, so moved.
Knox, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Martorano and a second by Ms. Knox. Board members, please cast your votes.
Norris, yes. Campos, yes.
Dix, yes.
Mayberry Mays, yes.
The vote is approved, 7-0. Next item, E2, public hearing for the fiscal year 2025 proposed budget adoption and certification. That was louder, wasn't it? Ooh, sorry. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item F1? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. May I have a motion and a second to approve item E2?
Point of order, sorry. Dr. Roberts will introduce the matter.
I am so sorry, Mr.
That's fine.
Roberts. Dr. Roberts. Dr. Roberts, Superintendent Dr. Roberts, would you please introduce the matter?
Certainly, Madam Vice Chair. I recommend that the board adopt and certify the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025 following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item E2?
Actually, this is Jackie. May I ask for a friendly amendment? Apologies. Can we somehow just note that we are going to be coming back to amend the budget by the end of June? So I apologize. I'm not trying to impact the progress of the vote, but I just want to make sure that we are acknowledging that that is something we committed to do once we have the goals and guardrails complete. And maybe there's just some consensus, Dr. Roberts and Shashank, that is the conversation we had.
Certainly, Madam Chair, I believe that it is prudent for us to take advantage of the window of time that we have within which we can make amendments to the budget as we continue to look at and review and refine our interim goals, interim guardrails, goals and guardrails. So absolutely.
Great. So just in terms of clarification, are we talking about by the end of June?
Yes, we can come back by the end of June. We're committing, as a matter of fact, to the team and I to come back to the board and community by the end of June to amend the budget as needed.
Great, thank you. And apologies for jumping in. Madam Vice Chair, back to you. I apologize.
Thank you, Ms. Norris. May I have a motion and a second to approve item E2?
Knox, so moved.
Dix, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Knox and a second by Mr. Dix. Board members, please cast your votes.
Norris, yes.
Campos, yes.
Dix, yes.
Mayberry Mays, abstain.
The vote is approved, 7-0. 6? Was it 6?
6-0,
clarification.
1 abstaining.
Thank you.
Skylar,
He
Yeah,
did.
he
I thought he
abstained.
said the same.
no,
Okay.
abstain.
I'm so sorry. Mr. Skylar Mayberry, Mace, I misunderstood you. 6-1.
6-0.
6,
0, 1 abstaining.
1 abstained. Thank you. We now have one information-only item. Item is F1, Head Start Policy Committee meeting minutes, February 2024. Next on the agenda, we have items of privilege. I would like to ask if our board members would like to share anything.
This is Jackie. I will go first and just give a shout out to Hoover High School and Principal Kelly and Assistant Principal Randazzo and the whole Hoover team. I just appreciate and applaud the bravery and courage they're taking in putting in place a significant initiative to address mental health challenges that are taking place in our youth community. And so it's the Hoover Mental Health Movement. And they're working really hard to reconnect students to Hoover. And I appreciate their hard work and just wanted to say thank you and call that out.
Thank you, Ms. Norris. Anyone else?
In the spirit of renewal and growth that April brings, let's recognize the invaluable contributions of our volunteers during National Volunteer Week, which I might have missed by a bit. But their dedication embodies the spirit of service and strengthens the bonds within our school community. Let's express our gratitude, or I express my gratitude and appreciation for their selfless efforts in shaping brighter futures for our students.
Very lovely, Ms. Martorano. You're right. Volunteers are everything. I did want to close the loop. Last board meeting, I shared that the North High Gala was going on, and that was last weekend. They had a successful gala. And so thank you to all the volunteers, look at that, that make that event happen. I know they are still fundraising and continually fundraising. So go check out all the amazing things that are happening at North and consider making a financial donation to make a difference.
Thank you, Ms. Knox. Anyone else that would like to share? Thank you. I will now turn it over to Superintendent Roberts for his superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Certainly, this evening, I want to certainly refer back to one of the items that the board voted on and approved this evening, item 6 on the consent agenda, and that is the tentative agreement between the Des Moines Public Schools and the Des Moines Education Association in terms of the Teachers Comprehensive Agreement. The relationship between the school system, Des Moines Public Schools, and the Des Moines Education Association, the DMEA, as well as our relationship with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, is healthy. And there aren't too many places in this country and school systems where that is the case or the order of the day. As superintendent, it behooves me, on behalf of the executive cabinet, to say thank you for a spirit of collaboration with which our leadership of both of these bargaining units always show up. It is clear to us that you have the best interests of not only students in mind, but the adults who you represent. Thank you. Thank you for a period of time where we engaged in some spirited and healthy discussions and negotiations. I'm immensely thankful, and I may leave some names out, but I want to say thank you to, thinking about the DME, to Josh Brown, certainly to Josh, Doug, our lead negotiator Blake, our president-elect Ann, Joe, and others who have represented the DMEA so very well. In terms of AFSCME, certainly thank you to President Adam, to Representatives and negotiators Rozzi and Shannon. You know, our data tells us, both qualitative and quantitative data tells us that exit interviews and other sources of data, that our teachers and staff, while some of them may leave the district, they are not leaving primarily because of compensation. We've seen a plethora of research over the years that tells us that teachers are not engaging in this noble profession because of compensation. But tonight's vote echoes a very, very clear fact. The Des Moines Public Schools Board, Superintendent, and Cabinet, we value teachers. Tonight's tentative agreement is one that is unprecedented at a 3.5% salary increase. And we know that the money will never be enough, but we are truly encouraged by this approval this evening, and we are looking forward to continuing to strengthen our relationship with both bargaining units and representative bodies. Teachers and staff, we appreciate you, we value you. On behalf of the board and the executive cabinet, we applaud you and we look forward to amazing work next year. Thank you for your continued partnership. Madam Vice Chair, that concludes this evening's superintendent's remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Thank you for joining us this evening. We greatly appreciate you all. This meeting is adjourned at 5:48. We will take a brief break and move into our work session to discuss our proposed goals and guardrails, followed by a closed personnel session.
Madam Vice Chair, how long will the break be?
5 minutes, is that okay? Yes. Back at 5:55. Yes. 6 minutes. Are we there? Is everyone ready?
Ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Muy bien, very well.
I did just ask if there is a link we're referring to, Rosie, to potentially put it in the chat, just to make sure we have the same link
Okay, I'll
that we're
check
going to be
it.
talking through. Thank you.
AJ, do you want to go ahead and, are we ready, Rosie, with the link for
Sending it
everyone?
right now.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Rosie? Sí? Lista?
Yeah,
Ready?
you're ready.
Okay, perfect. We will be discussing our goals, guardrails tonight. AJ, do you want to go ahead and begin?
Yes. So I want to introduce the conversation, but then immediately going to hand it over to staff to walk through their interim goals, interim guardrails. But I want to introduce this so the board is clear about what there is to be listening for. So the job of the board is to represent the vision and values of the community. And so you do that by identifying what are goals of what we want our students to know and be able to do that represents the community's vision, and what are the values, the non-negotiables that have to be honored. And you represent those through what we call guardrails. So that is your function. But those tend to be things that you only know once per year. And so in order to be able to track progress throughout the year, you need what we call interim goals and interim guardrails to help you be able to track progress so you're not enjoy your access to putting the community's wishes front and center through the goals and guardrails. The interims are measures, and so that their intention isn't to be pleasing or unpleasing. Their intention is to be, is this accurately measuring? Is this a reasonable interpretation of how we would go about measuring the community's vision and values? And so I just share that to clarify. The main question I'll be asking, and the main thing you should be listening for as you hear the staff bring these forward, is this a reasonable interpretation? Would a reasonable person look at the goal we came up with and come back with these as interim goals? Would a reasonable person look at the guardrails we came up with and come back with these as interim guardrails? If the answer is yes, and the staff suggests to you that these are reasonable ways of measuring this, then we're very much done. If, however, the answer is no, or they are reasonable, but as you look at it, you realize that now understanding that's how we'd measure it, what we actually meant to communicate through the goals and guardrails was something different, then what the board might do is actually modify the goals or the guardrails themselves. You wouldn't modify the interims, that's the staff's job, but you may look at them and say, okay, yeah, you all nailed it, but it just highlights that we were slightly off base when we came up with these rough draft goals and guardrails. And so our way of solving for that is we need to make some tweaks or modifications to our goals and guardrails. So either this, you hear what they have to offer, and it sounds like it's a reasonable interpretation, in which case we're done, or it doesn't sound like a reasonable interpretation, or it just sounds like it's not what you actually meant, in which case then the conversation would switch to, is there a specific language change you'd want to make to the goal or to the guardrail? And then that will trigger the staff going back, and we'll have the same conversation again at the next meeting. So that is the work of this evening. Before the staff dives in, any specific questions about that as a framing for your task?
AJ, thank you for framing that for us. I appreciate that. And I'm curious, where is it or when is it appropriate to have the conversation around the work that the superintendent and team did to identify whether or not the interims are in fact predictive and correlated to reaching the goal and honoring the guardrail?
Yes, that is absolutely this conversation you're having right now. That is, for this purpose, that is part and parcel of this larger conversation of, are these a reasonable interpretation? So for example, if you had a goal about literacy and the superintendent comes back and says, hey, we're going to monitor how many jugs of milk we serve at lunch. The question you're asking is this a reasonable interpretation of improving literacy? And the automatic question you'd be asking yourself is, how is this going to be, how much milk we serve predictive of whether or not little AJ can read? And so this idea about, are these truly predictive? That's their job to make the case for. And if they don't, then it may not meet the reasonableness test. But that is absolutely part of your conversation tonight.
So we should be asking that question with each of the interims that we are discussing today, not as a high level, tell me about how we went about identifying the predictive nature and the correlation from these interims to the goals themselves. Is that accurate?
There should be some amount of correlation between the interim goals and the goals. You won't have that for the guardrails because between the guardrails and the interim guardrails, because the guardrails aren't smart. But because the goals are smart and the interim goals are smart, then yes, it is appropriate to inquire about how do we know that there's a meaningful correlation. And just as a spoiler alert, if the staff does have some type of correlation, if they offer you something that is less than a 0.5, preferably nothing less than a 0.7, then I'd start to be iffy. But if it's in that range or higher, then I'd consider that a sufficiently robust correlation. And so if you're thinking that it needs to be a 0.8, 0.9, 1, something like that, it doesn't need to be that high. Anything north of 0.5 is fine. Preferably being north of 0.7 is ideal.
So AJ,
If I could ask a follow-up, go ahead, Jenna.
you can go ahead because I'm changing this topic. So if it's a follow-up, go ahead.
Well, I think I just want to understand the inputs, right? So there are multiple inputs that call them, whether you want to call them lead versus lag, but how and when does input show up? And I ask that connected to understanding if the inputs are happening and we're not successful in the interims, does it help for us to understand what the inputs? So for instance, let's say it's each child needs 49 minutes of reading a day, of academic minutes. I'm just wondering where inputs factor in, if at all, and maybe that's in the monitoring conversation.
Yeah, so for the purpose of interim goals and interim guardrails, the administration should not bring you anything that looks like a input. And so what your colleagues are bringing up is this distinction between inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Inputs are the strategies that we deploy. Outputs are the lead measures that are knowable in the midst of the cycle. Outcomes are what she describes as lag measures knowable at the end of the cycle. Generally speaking, your goals and guardrails are those outcomes. They're the lag measures that you won't know to the end of the year. The interim goals and interim guardrails should be outputs. It should be data that's a measure of what is happening throughout the school year. So the interims should not be inputs. And the number one reason that the interims should never be inputs is because inputs are never predictive of the outcome. You cannot surmise from selection of the inputs whether or not that selected input will then have what the actual outcome is going to be. There is some predictive power that can be derived from later stage output metrics, but not from input metrics. And so that's why those wouldn't be part of your interim goals or interim guardrails. Now, the other part of your question is, okay, so where do those show up? In general, they largely only show up when statutory obligations intersect with managerial discretion, or said differently, when you're asked to vote on something. And so that's almost the only time, not the only, but almost the only time that the board winds up weighing in and either offering approval or non-approval of what the inputs are that the superintendent might select. In general, in this practice, what you all are looking at is not, did they pick the right number of minutes of instruction? You're looking at partway through the year, is little AJ actually more literate than he was at the beginning of the year? And if they got there by having 49 minutes of instruction or 56 minutes of instruction, generally speaking, you all are largely agnostic to that. But what you're not agnostic to is the interim goals. Have we actually seen growth in what little AJ knows and is able to do? And in particular, have we seen growth that seems to put us on track to actually accomplishing the goal at the end of the year that the board has set?
AJ, this is Pat, and I just want to follow up with that. I'm having a little bit of trouble with that, only because I want to understand Jackie's question a little bit more, because I'd like to hear what the inputs would be to make sure that they are reasonable to the goal or to the interims. And the reason I say that is because if in their head it's reasonable with 1 minute of reading every day that we're going to advance reading in the district, isn't it our job to oversee that and say that doesn't feel like these two things are matching up, and ask them to come back with another shot at it? I just, if we're not going to talk about how we're going to do it, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, so I just want to, that's what I'm asking. I just want to understand.
Yeah, I think wow, this feels like it got really loud all of a sudden. I think the fundamental thing that you're trying to highlight is the job's role of oversight a pre-function or a post-function? And so if the job's role of oversight is a pre-function, then that means decisions need to be queued up, but then they're brought to the board and you decide whether it goes forward or not, and then it goes forward. Or if oversight is a post-function, then a decision is made, it's implemented, and then the board looks at it to figure out, did this move us in the direction we wanted? And so that is something that every board has to decide for itself. Are we treating our oversight duties, which are inescapable, as a pre-function or as a post-function of the managerial decisions? This approach to governing definitively looks at oversight as a post-function, that you get crystal clear about what is it that this community expects of the school system, and then you hand that to the superintendent does something with it, and then you look at the data immediately after to figure out, did this get us closer to what the community wants? As distinct from if the board's oversight duties was a pre-function, where you got clear about, here's what the community's expectation is, superintendent come up with an idea, run it by us, we decide whether it's good or not, superintendent execute, and then bring back data, and we decide whether it's meaningfully aligned with the goals or not. And so if you all take the position that your oversight duties are a pre-function, I would just make sure to have that conversation. That's a conversation the board would want to have with your superintendent that is meaningfully different from the intentions of this approach to governance, which is really looking at saying, what does the community demand? What does it expect? And we are the arbiters of that. The superintendent doesn't get to select the goals, the board does. And then you hand it to the superintendent. The superintendent takes action grounded in that, consistent with whatever statutorily he's allowed to do. There are some things he can't do without coming back to you. For example, there are things that you all have to vote on that are definitely inputs. But law requires that you to vote on them, so you vote on them. But outside of legal requirements, which does involve you all with inputs quite a bit, the nature of this approach to governing is that the rest of the inputs that do not have a legal obligation for the board to vote on, the superintendent has been delegated the authority to proceed with those. And then you come in immediately after those decisions have been made and acted upon and monitor progress to figure out, is this in alignment with the community's vision and values? Is that responsive to your question?
AJ, it is, and fundamentally I agree with that. My angst about it comes with, we are the ones who just went to the community and listened to them and got a sense of their urgency and what they are asking. we are asked to reflect that back in our goals and guardrails. It is the job of the superintendent and staff to come up with, they're the experts. They know what we can do, but I feel like there has to be a little bit of a collaborative balance there. I think you are right in that it is their job, and we have said it is their responsibility to do this. I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is, I do think there is a collaboration to be had and a discussion to be had, as Dr. Roberts often says, to push their thinking and to be a partner in that if we see something that is concerning to the group. And so I guess that's all I'm.
Yeah, and again, there are a number of areas where state statute obligates that to be the case. So, for example, a budget is really a managerial document. A budget is no guarantee of how the dollars are going to be spent. In fact, you all will modify the budget that you've adopted probably multiple times before the end of the school year. A budget is a managerial document. It is not, in a classical sense, a governance document. You all are required to deal with it as a governance document as an artifact of state law. And so because state law says the board owns the budget, you do. But if you look at many organizations, the governing body does not actually approve the annual budget. The CEO does that. And so the reason that you are dealing with that, which is a classic example of an input, is because state law requires it. That's the same reason you all wind up voting on issues that come before the board before resources can be expended, is because state statute requires. So there is a significant amount of inputs that the board is statutorily obligated to be interacting with, and there is no way around that. And because state law has definitively said you will be involved in these specific managerial inputs. So it's not that you all aren't involved in managerial inputs. It's really now what we're just asking is, where is the line between where the board is involved in managerial inputs and where it's not? The current intention of that line is wherever state law says the line is. So if the state law says the board has to be involved in inputs, then you're involved. If the state law doesn't say you're involved in inputs, then you all are delegating, then you're delegating that to your superintendent. If you all wanted to modify that, of course, that, to my understanding of Iowa code, that is certainly within you all's purview. But again, that's a conversation I would encourage you all to have with the board as a whole, and certainly with your superintendent, is that would be a significant modification of the intended relationship. To the larger concept of it, my general coaching, and I mean this without any disrespect to the staff in the room, my general coaching of the board is that if you reach a point where you struggle to trust your administration with the day-to-day operations of the district, our coaching is to find a different superintendent.
Another question.
Yeah.
So I have your book, AJ, and I'm on page 118 where we talk about.
Know the page numbers.
Well, I have lots of highlighting, so yes. So one thing that when you kind of queued this up, you talked about looking for intention.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about numbers necessarily, and I'm kind of looking for some guidance from you on 118. You talk about goals need to be attainable, which I completely agree, but you also talk about effective school boards adopt goals that are intentionally cause disruption within the organization.
That's right.
And so help coach us through as we look at what's been proposed. How do we find that balance, especially when we look at data points that help me with that?
No, this is a super important question. So what you're trying to identify is, how do we know that the goals push hard enough that they're really challenging the organization and really honoring the needs of our students, but don't push so far that they are destroying the morale of our staff and dishonoring their contribution. And so the short answer is, this is a judgment call. But to your point, there are some things that you could ground that judgment in. So one of the things that I would encourage you to ground that judgment in is the amount of resources that you're prepared to deploy. So if you have seen 1% growth in little AJ's literacy over the past 5 years, 1% growth per year for the past 5 years. And you go back and you do the analysis, and we've spent about $100 per year to see that cause that 1% growth to happen. If you come up with a goal that says we want 3% growth per year instead of 1% growth, guess how much we recommend you should now be spending?
Yeah.
$300 per year instead of $100 a year. That there is a inescapable relationship between goal setting and resource allocation. And again, the reason for this is because it prevents you from being so timid that you're not pushing what's possible for children, but also prevents you from being kind of so ridiculous that you're actively creating harm for your teachers and your staff. And so that is one of the first things that I would use to ground it. And I think that's a question that it's appropriate for you to ask your staff. Could you help give us some insights into this? And they can go back and check that out and bring you some homework. It's like, roughly, here's what our investment in there has been. And what you'll quickly find out is that say you wanted to 10x the growth in a particular area, you may find out that you don't have 10x dollars available in that. And in that case, I'd say we need to pull back. So for example, with the literacy example, some of the things that you might have to hire an extra literacy coach who goes into the classroom and pulls out a group of students to work with. So now the teacher, instead of having 26 students, now maybe she's only working with 18, and that literacy instructor. But that literacy instructor who's now pushing in costs money. And so there's a finite amount of those literacy instructors. Like you probably can't afford to have one in literally every single classroom in the district. And so how much you can afford has an impact on how expansive your goals can be. In fact, to give a tangible example, I saw another district, they adopted 3 goals, but the one about literacy had a ridiculous amount of growth, and the other 2 goals had very minimal growth. And their reason for that is because they wanted these 2 things to happen, but they were explicitly telling the superintendent, this has got to be where the resources flow to the most, because this is what we've got to do. And so that's the first thing that I would encourage you when you're thinking about how do we know kind of how far to stretch. And I should clarify on this, that's the board's call and the board's call only. That is not the superintendent's decision, it's not the staff's decision. The board sets the goals, and so you all determine what's the target that we're aiming for, and then the administration has to figure out how to be responsive to that. And so that's the first thing is.
So right now, though, our goals are set, our targets are from the staff, right?
So the staff, you all explicitly told the staff that we want you to take these goals that we've drafted.
Right.
And build them out, make them
The
real.
intent, right.
But you own the goals. So even though they've done the best work they know how to do, if you as a board disagree, it is your job to set what those targets
Say
should be.
we want it to be higher, or we want this to be a
And
priority,
then
what's it going to
And then
take?
the staff would have to be responsive to that.
So may we jump in and actually look at this and start applying what you're saying to the actual information in front of us? If my board colleagues are amenable.
Other questions about this framing? So I offered a framing. You all had some technical questions to get clear about what your task is. Any other questions on that before staff dives in? Then I certainly here is, be a technical helpmate, but I defer.
All right. So within the document in front of you, there's an introduction page that just kind of has some background notes on kind of the rationale that we used for several things. I think one of the first things to point out is just while we did set spring targets, we set them at essentially a hold steady number for 2024 just because of how late we are into the school year and how close we are actually, as of right now, in ISASP testing. So that's where those initial spring 2024 targets were set from. Do you want to start with the goal 1 or do you want to start with the interim goals?
Goal 1 would be great.
Okay. So within goal 1, what we did was we looked at the ISASP ELA matched cohort data going back to 2021. So we don't have a whole lot of years to go back into to look at that matched cohort data just because of where COVID falls in the cycle. So we were able to look at both our statewide data and the DMPS data. And what we essentially modeled out was what would it have looked like if instead of the rate of change that our students had year over year, they would have had 40 points of change. 40 points in a year over year in ISASP is what would be considered the very, very top of the steady pace range. That range, I think, is about 25 to 40 points or 20 to 40 points. Above 40 points of change year over year would be considered, I think it's called aggressive. So based on that, we kind of modeled out, if we said 40 points for every student, what would that have looked like in change year over year? The 2 years that we were able to look at where we had both third and fourth grade to examine, there was a pretty significant difference in outcomes, both within DMPS and within that statewide data, with essentially the number of students meeting those benchmarks, both in DMPS and at the state level being pretty significantly different. And I can pull that actual report up if that would be helpful. But just kind of based on those two sets of information that we had to look at and that cohort information, we identified a growth rate of between 3 and 4%, being essentially that more aggressive end of the increase per year as a feasible but rigorous, I wouldn't call it necessarily aggressive, but feasible but rigorous goal for goal 1.
So the question that I know Jenna and I have is, you are projecting we're at 65% in the spring of 2027, which is lower than our existing goal. Can you help us understand why that is?
Yeah, and that's because of the new data that we have. I was not a part of the original goal-setting process, so I can't speak to how that goal was set. I can only speak to how this one was set. But for this one, we opted for a model that really looked at what we know about our data at this time. When that previous one was set, which I think was 2 years ago, we didn't have cohort data to examine. And so we were just looking at that straight year over year change, which we know at a state level can fluctuate pretty significantly, both at the district and within the state, as the test itself is adaptive and does change year over year.
Can you help me understand when you talk about the rate of change being on the high end of normal or close to aggressive or whatever we're going to call it? Is that based on statewide data or is that based on Des Moines?
That's based on the Iowa Testing's actual numbers and their cut points and I can pull up the actual language. I apologize, I don't have it right in front of me.
No, that's all right.
But it's their steady growth as opposed to their highest level.
And maybe this is a question for Dr. Roberts. As we look at this, Dr. Roberts, I don't want to speak for the rest of my colleagues. I'm looking at this and not feeling good about those numbers. And the reason I'm not feeling good about them, and the explanation that I'm hearing, is that it feels as if that is based off of what we used to do. And I feel like we are we are where we are, but I feel like you're going to do different things. And so expecting the same results, we are going to do different things. We are going to be more aggressive. We are going to be focused in on this. Should we expect higher results? And so maybe you can help understand how we came to these numbers being reasonable.
Thank you, Patrick. I know before Josie jumps in, I appreciate your wondering. Actually, it's to the contrary. We're not setting this sort of target based on what we used to do. We're setting it based on our current reality. I think what Josie shared is the target that we had set previously that Kim referenced was based on whomever set those targets based on the data that we had at the time. And now that we have this cohort data, we were looking at the data and making some reasonable assumptions about where our predictions will be.
And if we go, I'll just, to kind of chime back in, and there was a document shared with you guys back in February that I'm going to reference back to. But if we look at the average grade 3 to grade 4 change between 21 and 22, our district change was just about 33 points. And our average change between 22 and 23, between those third and fourth graders, was about 23 points. So when we say we're looking at setting a goal of an average change of 40 for every student, that is adding an additional between 10 and 15 points, essentially, to their change year over year, which is where even though the percent increasing in the benchmark doesn't increase as quickly, it's actually saying that at the student level, we're seeing a more aggressive shift than we have seen in the last 2 years in that cohort data.
My wondering is if we're looking at cohort data, is it really speaking to systems change? And so I looked at AJ a bit on kind of best practice recommendation when we're looking at certain populations of students. And forgive me, this might be too in the weeds and on the data side of things, but looking at cohort data is completely different than looking at it the way that we've done in the past. And I think it really changes what it is that we're monitoring. So which is going to speak more to systems level change? That's what we're looking for, is systems level change. And if we're focusing in on a certain population, different from the population that we were looking at previously. Perhaps I'm not articulating this properly, but.
Yeah, I think it's a great question and a wondering, but may I offer that, Josie? May I offer that I think the process in itself, right, really lends itself to system level change. And so whether we are looking at and measuring cohort level data or year over year student data, I think it can still get us to the desired outcome.
And I want to be clear, we're not advocating or saying that we're monitoring cohort data. We're just the background of how we got to those numbers and what that feasible percentage change year over year is. We used cohort data in order to identify and define that change year over year, just because we know that there can be so many fluctuations within both state and district data when you look at that year over year change.
So we're using one
Sample
sample size. Oh,
No, sorry, Kim, I was just asking if somebody could actually just define cohort, because I think it's a really important point, and that would be very helpful for this conversation.
Yeah, so when I say we looked at cohort data, we went back into 2021 third graders, and then subsequently 2022 fourth graders. So because the goal is being set around 2024, to identify that average change in ISASP score between third grade and fourth grade, to identify that growth, that potential growth for an individual, and then subsequently an average. We would be looking at then 21, 22, and then 22 and 23. We can't go back any farther than that because we don't have 2020 data because of COVID, because there was no ISASP taken in that spring.
so the earlier statement that you made was we're using cohort data to guide our decision-making around setting these not only the goal endpoint, but also the annual targets for the goal. But we're not going to be, so we're using one set of students to set the goal, and we're going to be using a different set of students to monitor the goal. And I'm grappling with that a little bit.
Yeah, and so what we were trying to define was having a starting place for what is our current state when we look at change between third and fourth grade, and where are we as a current state. And so and kind of going back to what I was talking about previously, in DMPS, in between the spring of 21 and the spring of 22, when you look at that set of students, students grew an average of 32 points. When we look at going from 22 to 23, students grew an average of 24 points. And so that was where we started to look at that information. And then to your goal of systemic level change and aggressive change, we said, okay, if 32 and 24 is where we've been in change year over year, if we said instead we want to see all students or an average student make 40 points of change, which would be a pretty significant increase in that average, how would that change the percent of students meeting benchmark? And then we looked at kind of across our hypothetical fourth grade achievement, if students instead of making 34 points of growth had made 40 points of growth, or if students instead of making 24 points of growth had made 40 points of growth, this is where we would have this is what our increase year over year would have been, which is where then we generated that 3 to 4 points of growth year over year. So we're using the cohort data to model out and to thought process out how can we change our current system from where we have been with percent of students meeting benchmark to where we could be.
I don't know. Are we going to go through it all? Do we just want to go through all the interims and then ask questions on one, or how do you want to proceed in this process?
I would generally recommend focus on one goal at a time. I'll get that for you.
What about the interims?
Yeah, the goal and the interims.
The goal and the interims. Do you want to share anything else, Josie, about the interims? Thank you.
Yeah, so to the question that was kind of previewed, in terms of correlative properties, we do have above a 0.75 correlation between each of the interims and goal 1. So just kind of wanted to check that box for you. In terms of that, beyond that, what we looked at was looking at our entire early reading system. So starting with 1A with our second and third grade CBM reading. FAST is the screener that is taken 3 times a year, K-8, both in reading and in math. So we started with that as our first interim. Our second interim is that same measure, but focusing in on Black and Latinx students based on the board's interest and focus around student population as examined in Goal 2. And then our third interim is looking at fourth grade students meeting benchmark on FastBridge A reading. So looking then directly at that fourth grade year and how students are performing on that screener throughout the year coming up to their ISASP assessment in the spring. These targets, you'll notice, are set a little bit lower than the goal targets. Part of that is because FastBridge as a screener is intended to cast a wider net than our final assessment, than ISASP necessarily is, because it has a different purpose than ISASP does.
So I'm not a data person and at all, just some common sense questions for you. One would be, your spring of 2027, like for 1A, right? Your FastBridge, well, let's not do that one. How about Oh, I see. So they're second and third grade. So I just want to make sure that your interims, you feel like will ladder up to achieve the goal, like you've done all of that.
Yes.
Okay, that
Yep.
makes sense.
So I want to lean in on this question. I think what you're asking is if you accomplish the interims, will that have the effect of accomplishing the goal? Yeah, so I would offer that exact same question, that often I find that if the goal is we want to be at 65%, that we'd need to be a little bit beyond that on the interims because of the correlation isn't one-to-one. So when I see this, what I'm presuming then is that when you all ran the data, that you consistently found that a 65 on the interim outperformed the
Yes.
score on the summative.
Yes.
Is that responsive to your inquiry?
Yes, thank you.
So this is Pat. I'm going to ask the question that we were just discussing. Dr. Roberts, what, if any, inputs, new inputs, and change did your team talk about to get to the numbers that you got to, and make you believe that we will, because it is significant change. The numbers aren't great. I don't think anybody's super happy with it, but they would be significant movement. And so what did you discuss with your team in how we are going to change our approach to reading and meeting these goals?
So are you asking a tactical question about what the moves are that we're going to make? I mean, there are so many practices that we certainly are going to look at. I think if there's one that we need to focus on is, and I've talked about this before, with Fidelity looking at the science of reading as a framework.
Okay.
I
I'm
think
just
it is
asking.
going to be helpful.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think it is going to be helpful, though, at some point for us to understand the investments that are being recommended, because I think that is going to help us understand the comment that AJ made. Is this a status quo investment? Is this more money, less money? So whether that forum is for this conversation, I think it is a fair question to understand what we're budgeting to support the interims and the overarching goal.
Yeah, we're
And I think
acknowledging
I'm
that
just trying
the
to-
question is one that is well received. I'm offering that the science of reading is one framework we can utilize, and certainly happy to, and I think it's important for us to come back to the board whenever we're seeking significant approval for resources, that we provide you with a rationale or justification about our asks. So I don't think there's an issue at all there.
No, I was just, Dr. Roberts, I was just trying to get a sense of, as you all discussed this, we are trying to make a shift in a directional shift. And so we talk a lot about these numbers and can we hit these numbers? And that's one way of thinking about it. But I think another way of thinking about it is, how are we going to do things differently? And so I'm just trying to get a sense from you of what the discussion was like, and maybe were there some significant ideas brought forward to really kickstart and make some change?
Yeah, excellent question. Certainly, yeah, there are a number of adjustments and refinement that we are going to make to our plan around daily operational instructional excellence, and at the appropriate time, I'm happy to certainly unpack those with the board, myself and other members of the teaching and learning team, if that's helpful. But I think to your point, it would behoove us to make sure that we are sort of demonstrating this proclivity to be more innovative and certainly bold, right, with some of what we intend to look at in terms of instructional shifts and pedagogical strategies.
Could you be more bold? I mean, I guess it's been 4 years, pretty much stagnant numbers. We've been at the table too, talked a lot about investments, talked a lot about aligning our investments last year with the budget, anticipating kind of a flat line again, so hovering around 50. To make a 5% gain every year is a lot, but I'm wondering, are we selling ourselves short? Is there more growth possible, in your opinion, with more investment?
Yeah, that's excellent. So yeah, there certainly is an opportunity for us to have more growth with the right investments. I don't necessarily believe that there's a one-to-one correlation with the number of resources you're invested in that will get you to the desired outcome around student academic achievement, right? That's one-to-one. I think some additional data for us to consider is, are there opportunities for us to boldly refine our approach to pedagogy? Are we looking at our multi-tiered support systems? Do we have the appropriate interventions that we have been utilizing with students? And so as we think about the tactical approaches, there are certainly opportunities for us to be more bold. If I'm hearing the question boldness with regards to the actual targets we're setting, certainly that lends itself to a different discussion, right? We want to make sure that we are anchoring our targets in our current reality and looking at the data that Josie and the rationale Josie was just sharing. Is that helpful? But there are opportunities for us to be bold and more bold in terms of shifting our pedagogical practices.
So board members, I would actually invite you to push on
And
this.
so how will we learn? Yeah.
The question that you just asked is, I think, heavily related to the question that Pat and your board chair were just trying to ask as well. And so I want to encourage you to push on this because this is a really important part of the process. The question that I'd nudge your superintendent with is really trying to get at how much more bold could we afford to be, recognizing that the more bold you are with here's the target that we want to attain, what I'm suggesting to you is you should expect to drive more resources into that area. Money ain't magical. You've probably sorted that out pretty quickly. Which what that really means as a practical matter is, as a board, how comfortable are you with redirecting funds from places where they're currently being deployed and redeploying them into the places of your goals? The more comfort you have with that as a board, the more bold your goals can be. The less comfort you have with that, the less comfortable. And I want to put a fine point on this, not to dissuade you. My intention is not to dissuade you. If anything, I'd be encouraging you. But to make sure that you understand what you're signing yourselves up for. 85% of your budget is what? People. And so when I say you can be more bold if you're willing to pay for it, what that actually means is a practical matter, are you willing to let some people go in some parts of the organization to free up resources to redeploy with different people in other parts of the organization? So if you wanted to grow third grade literacy, are you willing to increase class sizes from 30 students to 35 students in the high school and cause those savings to be redeployed, recognizing that whoever loses their job at the high school probably isn't the same person you're going to hire on to teach third grade literacy. So it's probably somebody who's functionally losing their job in one part of the organization, and you're using that money to hire somebody different entirely in another part of the organization. That is what you want going through your mind as you're making this decision. And it begs, how aggressive, not really does the superintendent want to be, it's really how aggressive do you as a board want to be? How much disruption is worth the relative gain that it might generate in student performance? And so that, I really want to push you as a board to lean in on this question, because now is the perfect time to do so in this conversation. If you are feeling like we need to see more, then this is your time to lobby your colleagues to change that number. But I just wanted to walk you through the practical mechanics of what it means to do so.
AJ, I just want to caution though, I think the example you give may be a false choice. We are not, that doesn't necessarily mean higher class sizes if we move. I get your point about personnel, but there are, I think this has been my point all along in the budget process, is knowing where the money is helpful to know where the money can go so that we understand how we can be helpful in getting these goals and set a vision for how these goals are going to be achieved. And so I think that is, if you hear some frustration in my voice, that's it. Because I want to know where we can not move people out of teaching positions, move more people into teaching positions so that we can give more resources to the classroom. And But I struggle with this, AJ, because it's Dr. Roberts' job to do that, not ours. So, I mean, like, I feel stuck there because I don't want to make a suggestion that's not welcome or that's not my job to do.
But it is definitely your job to set what the targets are as a board. And so if the superintendent says, let's aim for 65, and you all say, let's aim for 70, then that is within your authority to do. But to use a different example, and by the way, I actually think the more aggressive you get, you are eventually going to run into the example that I gave you. And so don't think that there's a way out of that at a certain level of aggressiveness. But at a less aggressive posture, it might be that the superintendent says, hey, you know what, we have a crew of 10 people mowing the lawn when it gets to be 1.5 inches. If we let the grass grow to 2 inches, can we mow that with 8 people instead of 10? And then can we take those 2 FTEs and apply those somewhere else? That is moving non-instructional positions, but you just have a lot fewer of those than you have instructional positions. I'm not trying to recommend or say that one strategy is the right strategy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you all get to describe how aggressive you want to be, but just don't make that decision without understanding that it also means that you all as a board are committing in that moment to stand behind the operational modifications that are necessary to pay for whatever additional level of aggression that you all believe best represents the vision of your community. But that is a decision for y'all to make, not a decision for your superintendent to make. He will then have to go make operational changes that you all then will have to sign off on.
So is the framing question, can everybody hear me okay? My internet's a little spotty.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So is the framing question, how much more bold can we be as it relates to the literacy goal? And to ask Dr. Roberts to provide some context to what bold means in terms of our budget parameters. Is that a fair way to move this conversation forward if there was consensus from the board that we wanted to inquire in that direction?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, that would be fair.
Before we go there, and forgive me if I should have asked this earlier, but the interim goal 1C, we're looking at fourth graders. And in my mind, looking at fourth graders as an interim, it lends itself to being too late, for lack of a better word. So can you help me understand why the choice of looking at fourth graders for an interim goal?
Yeah, that went to the direction on correlation. We know that one of the strongest correlations that we have and an indicator in terms of an indicator for outcomes on ISASP is outcomes on A reading. And so based on the desire to be able to have the kind of immediacy of knowing how fourth grade is going within the year, leading up to that goal, monitoring at the end of the year was why we opted to look at that.
Why, did you look at, do we not do it in fall to have it be an earlier data point set though? Because if you just get monitored in spring, how much time do you have to course correct? Or how do you see using that?
No time to course correct.
Yeah, my understanding with this is that these are just spring targets, but these will be monitored throughout the year. So there will be fall and winter monitoring as well. We were just instructed to provide spring targets.
That's correct. I think the question you're trying to get clarified is how frequently is this data available throughout the year?
Yeah, so all FAST assessments are taken 3 times a year.
Right.
In fact, the spring FAST assessment is taken after ISASP. And so the intent with this is that this would be monitored in the similar way as the other FAST assessments in the fall and the winter as the indicators of moving towards success before that ISASP in the fall.
But
we just only
it's taken
provided
after,
spring
then
targets based on,
What's the point?
or in the spring.
Yeah,
If they take the data after, if they're taking ISASP after they take, or if they take
This is.
Yeah, and that has to do with how the reporting calendar works, that in the
it's
two
not
end up
reading
at the
data.
same time in terms of how they're actually reported to the board. But the fall and the winter would both occur earlier in the year with the monitoring calendar. If you would rather see fall and winter targets, we can absolutely provide those. I just was instructed to provide spring.
And I don't know that the targets are necessarily the concern. The concern is if our goal is for fourth grades to meet a certain benchmark in the spring, and one of our interim goals is a fall and winter and spring assessment of our fourth graders, it does not give us enough time to course correct. If we find out in the fall, like, I don't think that this is going to be an indicator that we can use to adjust our practices between the fall, winter, and the spring ISASP. So the fall, winter A reading and spring ISASP. So it's more so the population that I'm concerned about. Like, if this particular assessment is in fact very predictive of ISASP, that's great. But as fourth graders looking at this, I don't see how we could possibly course correct or use this as a tool to course correct.
And that's the second and third grade is included to be the earlier course correction. And then the fourth grade, that would, Dr.
So
Roberts, I don't
those
know
are
if you want to speak more
CBM,
to.
and this is a reading. So they're two different, they're different indicators.
Can I try to form this as a question? I think the question being asked is, can you receive A reading data in the winter for fourth graders and have time to make instructional practice that would impact them by the time they take ISASP in the spring? I think that's the question you're asking.
And the answer is yes. You know, if you're thinking about, I want us to think about it through two different lenses. One, considering looking at this as a summative assessment because of the length of time within which it takes for us to take the assessment. And course correction comes as a result of the utilization of formative assessments. And so, yes, if we look at teachers and leaders who are accessing winter data, then there is an opportunity for us to still course correct around looking at the granular nature of the data that students have on each student and then making the corrections. Is that helpful? Or is there a different question that I'm hearing?
The struggle that I have with that is Fastbridge is a screener. It is not summative.
Sure.
I mean, if we're going to use a screener as a summative assessment, I just don't know that that's best practice.
No, we're not.
It's not.
We're not.
So Madam Vice Chair, I can proceed if you'd like. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
No, I would encourage you to nudge on this. I did not hear you get an answer to your question that met what you're trying to understand. So I'll repeat this again, but I think you need to express to your superintendent whether you got an answer to your question and whether it made sense for you or not. So the question that I thought you were trying to ask is it possible that we will receive data in the winter for fourth graders that will still allow us to make instructional course corrections that will show up in spring assessment on ISASP? I heard your superintendent say yes, but then as I was watching your face, I did not see you feel like you understood the yes.
No, I understand. If he believes that is to be true, then I trust that. Looking at this, we asked the question, is this a reasonable interpretation of the goal? For me, what we have here would not be reasonable. That's where I'm at right now on this particular interim.
Staff, you have any reflections?
I'm not sure I understand what would you prefer in terms of what does because the purpose of it, as we laid it out, was to give us that opportunity in the fall and winter to have a very clear through line from where we are with that particular set of students going into their goal year, where we're going to be monitoring them in the spring. And so would the preference be to not see that in that time frame, or to only see second and third grade students? And our teaching and learning team, I think, can speak more succinctly to it than I can, but in the classroom level, you know, teachers are always looking at their data. They use their screening data to make instructional changes. And that's the work of the instructional coaches and the PLCs and that team.
Absolutely.
And so that is
You're speaking about classroom level change, and what we as a board are looking for is systems level change. So when we are monitoring our goals, and when we've been monitoring our goals, let's just say for the last year, we frequently get a response of, we need more time. This is a large ship. It's hard to move a large ship. So if we are not meeting a fourth grade fall or winter interim assessment, and you're telling me that we can course correct before the spring ISASP, this is still that same large ship, and I do not doubt the use of data in the classroom and the use of PLCs at the building level to inform daily instructional changes and differentiated instruction. I see it every time I go into a classroom, and I celebrate it. That is not systems level change. And what we're looking for here is something that is going to help the or the board identify whether or not the superintendent is driving system level change. And I don't think that this is describing that.
So that, to me, and I'm happy to find a different measure. I think the instructions that I went forth with were what are highly indicative measures of the outcome. And so that was where we landed with fourth grade, was that we know that that is the strongest, that FAST in fourth grade is the strongest predictor of FAST or of outcomes on ISASP. And then we paired that with that second and third grade level in order to have both lenses.
Yeah, that's helpful, Josie. And I certainly value and really appreciate this part of the conversation, Ms. Maturana, because while I am leading the strategic shifts around system levels change, let me respectfully offer to the board that in order for us to even attain system levels change when it comes to student academic achievement and outcomes, we have to focus in a really granular way on classroom level change in terms of teaching and learning. We're not going to get to systems level change with student academic achievement and outcomes if we do not refine and continue to push on our classroom level and school level change around teaching and learning. Hopefully that's helpful, but I'm happy to continue this discussion.
Absolutely, I agree, absolutely, that the work needs to cascade throughout the entire organization in order for us to meet these goals. You know, if my board colleagues feel that this is reasonable, I am happy to move forward, and I would just look forward to what it looks like in practice. So if we're not meeting that winter A reading for fourth graders, what that looks like in practice all the way from this board table when we're monitoring that, you know, the FAST window closes in February, right?
Yeah.
And we're monitoring let's say end of February at the very earliest.
It's not data we can use.
And ISASP is the second week of April.
So two reactions. One, I really appreciate the question and the push around what does it look like in practice. I think we have spent a lot of time almost belabeling our excitement around our investment in GLEAM as a framework and how it aligns to, in this case, our EL curriculum. So what it looks like in practice is where we are creating a system of instructional leaders and teachers who are calibrating around what does grade level instruction, what does highly rigorous instruction looks like, in this case across all of our elementary school classrooms. And so there are two practices that are happening that we're continuing to improve upon. One is making sure that we have a really robust set of instructional rounds where teachers are spending an inordinate amount of time under the guidance and tutelage of their school leaders, as well as some of our instructional coaches, visiting classrooms, not only across individual schools, but across the district, so that they too can see where are there gaps in terms of our instructional practices and pedagogical strategies. So in terms of a tactical approach and what it looks like, that's one place where we can look at that. Are we all aligned on and calibrated around what does grade level instruction look like for grades 1, 2, and 3, so that we can get to the grade 4 target we've set? What does grade level instruction look like from a culturally responsive standpoint? Are we truly meeting the needs to address one of the interim goals around truly addressing Black and brown students and their desire to make sure that we are exposing them to engaging, meaningful, and affirming instruction? So I think getting granular, right, that's what it should look like. We should start to see a much stronger calibration around instructional practices, regardless of which zip code our schools are located in and who the school leader is.
It feels like you all have nudged on this a little bit, and I think people have got their questions answered, and so I'd recommend you all move on. I would offer a caution to the staff. What I hear your board members saying is that previously you've indicated that 2 months wasn't enough time to make a system-level shift. With this as an interim goal, you're saying 2 months is enough time to make a system-level shift, and that your board members will then expect to not hear that 2 months isn't enough time to make a system-level shift in future monitoring reports. That to me is my net takeaway from this, that I would just caution the staff to be mindful of. But I think everybody has expressed themselves on this. I'd recommend you move on. Are there other questions, concerns about goal number 1 or any of the 3 interim goals?
I think I'm not sure that we've reached consensus whether or not this is the right target or not, and an understanding of if we dedicated more resources. I mean, I think I heard a lot about being more bold. So if we were more bold, what would that look like? And I'm wondering how we get to a finer point around that, so we can actually weigh the costs and benefits. And I only will push that if other board members feel that inquiry to push.
So I'd recommend that either you directly ask your superintendent to suggest what more bold might look like as a number and what he feels like he could support, or a board member propose. I recommend that we move to this and then ask the superintendent his view of what that would look like as a access to then the board making decision, do we want to do that or not?
Can I make a proposal, Jackie, and to the board? Can we go through them all and then maybe evaluate? Because I think what AJ said that I thought was really powerful was, are we going to just try to achieve 5% growth in all of these areas, or are we going to see places where we're going to scale back and invest more in one? I mean, is that kind of maybe getting a holistic view at the goals over the next 5 years and determining if we want to give any direction from there? That would be helpful to me, then spin our wheels here and then go to 8th grade math and say, and we need more there, and then go to career readiness and say, we need more there. I think we should look at them all first. Everyone agrees.
Goal 2?
Sure.
Goal 2 is much of the same methodology, except instead of looking at 2nd and 3rd grade, we looked at specifically that student population in 6th grade, in 7th grade, and then in 8th grade. Much of the same methodology applies. If there's questions beyond what we discussed in goal 1.
Dr. Roberts, I'm less familiar with our literacy investments at the middle school level. just because we haven't monitored it or talked about it at the board table, are all of the same investments that we know you've been making, like the Gleam framework, PLCs, like some of those similar investments in literacy at elementary, specifically around the fourth grade level we've been monitoring, do those apply to the middle school? I'm just kind of wondering about new investments to make, again, another large jump. And I feel like in looking at our prior goal, that's understandable because you've been building up to this over the last year. With this kind of being a whole new goal, do you feel like we already have adequate resources in place that you just need to tweak, or kind of some rationale on that?
Yeah, we do not have adequate resources in place to ensure that our middle school students are achieving at the levels that we are expecting them to achieve. But there are two really encouraging opportunities. The first is, yes, as we are thinking about our Gleam framework and how it's applicable to sort of having this intersection to our curriculum, and as well as making sure that there's calibration around practices, the practices goes across grades 1 through 8. So yes. Secondly, I believe that there is a tremendous opportunity for us to, and we have not done this with a level of fidelity, but to really focus on this concept of vertical alignment and vertical theming, right? Where we are creating more opportunities for teachers who are teaching in our elementary schools and teachers in middle schools to really have more time that is dedicated to really engage in sort of a professional learning community. Particularly when we think about teachers who are fourth and fifth grade teachers, really vertically aligning with teachers who are sixth and seventh grade teachers. So there are two really great opportunities for us to really build on our practices to get closer towards achieving the 8th grade goal. That idea of vertical alignment and vertical theming. And then to build on what we started this year, which is the Gleam walks and Gleam practices, transcends just our elementary schools. They're also part of our middle schools. What I intend to come back to the board with, though, once we get a little bit more granular around an assessment of what are those resources that we will need, when we come back to the board with any asks and requests, you will get a lot more information about our rationale and justification for those asks.
And I have the same concern here with interim goal 2C that I did with the interim goal 1C, is the 8th grade monitoring being just too late. And know that best practices, we don't have to have 3 interim goals to be monitored, correct, AJ?
We have 1 to 3. We strongly recommend exactly 3 for each, which is a point that will be more obvious on the next goal. But to your question, you have 1, 2, or 3. We strongly recommend 3 for each.
So same, I mean, is it just happens to be that 5% growth here as well? It's all
It
rooted
matched.
in actual, okay,
Yeah.
data and,
Yeah.
okay. Any other questions on goal 2? Colleagues on the phone?
Just as a point of process, I think Ms. Materano's raising the question and concern around in goal 1 and now 2C here. I think I want us to find an opportunity to really dig a little bit deeper into this, because I think in order for us to really find a way forward around alignment and getting the strongest approach to the practice, so just want it to be noted, whether it's in this session or we come back, I want to make sure that we're doubling down on finding a way forward with that one.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and particularly hearing that, one of the things that you're focusing on is vertical alignment between the elementaries and middle schools. I think seeing that in the interims, aligns with what you're saying, and that's not presented here. So, thank you.
Anything else in 2, Madam Vice Chair?
No, I don't have anything.
Are Anna and Skylar still on the line?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Sorry, we can't see you, so we just want to make sure. that we're not talking over you.
No, I'm just very interested in noisy airport right now, so I have been listening.
Are we okay to proceed to goal 3? Board,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. So goal 3, you've seen a little bit of information background on when it was initially proposed. This is a brand-new measure that was identified and created this year as a part of this process, based on the board's request for a measure for a metric that somehow measured future readiness and ability to be successful post-secondary enrollment. Based on that, we pulled together this framework of enroll, enlist, employ with several possible indicators that could meet each of those categories to identify that a student would be prepared to be successful in that after they graduate. So you'll see the initial data that is laid out there for spring 21, 22, and 23. So these are looking at senior year outcomes. So looking at a student who has been enrolled for 4 years, or who is with us at the end of their 4th year, and their, and what percentage of students have achieved 4 or more of those future ready indicators in that time frame. So you can see spring of 21, 6.3%, that is abnormally low from what we saw from the other 2 years that we were able to gather data for. One of the indicators that we utilized was success on ISASP in their junior year. Seniors don't take ISASP, so we wanted to look back a year and see did they meet benchmark in that junior year. Or meet proficiency. Because spring of 2020 was COVID, there was no ISASP that year. So that pulls one of those major indicators that we see a pretty high level or relatively high level success on out of that potential for that cohort. And then spring of 22, 25.6% of students, and then spring of 23 is 32.2% of students. Based on that trend line, knowing that spring of 21 is a little bit of an outlier, we've laid out going forward a 3% increase year over year. In part because we're learning about capacity of the system as we go. With these indicators, we have not focused on them at the district level or at a systemic level. And so we're really hypothesizing at this point at how much we could grow year over year. And so we opted for a moderate approach to that. But if there is another direction the board would prefer us to take, we would be happy to address it.
Thank you, Josie. And essentially, again, because this is the very first time, and certainly it's timely that we have decided, certainly with the board's guidance, to embark upon this pursuit. We are starting off relatively conservative, but I believe that there are tremendous opportunities for us to adjust as we start to gather more data.
Can you talk about the interim as well and why there's only one where others considered? Are you planning to add more as this is new? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this was with this one, because this is new and a kind of different approach to data collection, what we identified as our interim measure is one that looks at 9th grade success in core content areas. We know that is a high indicator of graduation on time. 4-year graduation is one of the indicators within the list. So that was the underlying thought process that came up with this. We have many other options that we would like to start measuring, but we have to start data collection on it now. Things like completion of credentials, career assessment goals, DCAP, There's several other assessments that we could look at starting to take, post-secondary readiness assessments. However, because we've never taken those before, they would have to be newly collected measures beginning next year.
Can you, AJ, how does this work then? Would we put them in the monitor, we get reports on them as they're polled, and then are goals created when you don't have any data to start? Or how does it work out?
Yeah, so if this goal, goal number 3, if it still reflects the board's understanding the community's vision, then the coaching is absolutely proceed, even though, to be inarticulate about it, you're making it up. Like, you don't actually know because you haven't done this before, and so you were pursuing new territory. That's not problematic if that is the board's understanding of the community's vision. Then the appropriate thing to do is to proceed into unknown waters. But just do so with eyes open. Like, you don't actually know where this is going. Your staff is making their best guess at it. But to your superintendent's point, it won't be until you get into it that you'll have some true insights to draw on. But the fact that there isn't clear and obvious data available for you is not a compelling reason not to proceed if this is authentically a representation of the community's vision. Then you just start wherever you start, and you'll learn as you go.
But do they go in, we will eventually have 2 more interims, or how does it work? Will we have 2 more interims eventually?
I would still recommend that you move forward with 3 interims for each of these, recognizing that, again, you don't know a lot.
Right.
But my coaching to you all is I would still push your staff to
I would
come
want
up
to see a
with
baseline 0% and annual indicators, knowing that we're not collecting it now. We don't have previous year data, but baseline is 0, and once we start collecting it.
Got it.
Yeah, and again, you won't have the data, and as long as you know that, then there's nothing wrong with that. If this is a community's vision, you got to start somewhere, and that means starting with no data. But it's better to start now, not knowing where this is going, than to not start if the board believes this is a community's vision.
So to close the loop on this, we will ask our staff to bring back some recommendations for 2 other interim goals that we measure. We may not have numbers at this time, but we will ask for 2 other suggested measurement points for this goal. Okay.
Just a question about.
And if we can also bring back the complete list of
Jackie would like the complete list of other possible measurements.
Go ahead, Patrick.
The indicators.
No, that's okay.
Like, it's hard for
Future
me
the indicators.
to understand. Yeah, the end.
You're breaking up, Jackie.
The current indicators
I
that are
know. I'll just type.
the current indicators that are included in the DMPS framework are 1 or more AP courses with a C or higher, completion of JROTC with a C or higher, CTE pathway participation, 85% or higher attendance in their 4th year, graduation, college credit or dual credit course, C or higher, meeting benchmark or proficiency on math or reading in their 11th grade year, meeting proficiency on ELPA 21 during their high school career, or receiving the seal of biliteracy.
As before, I am going to push to strike all of those that are not about what students know and are able to do, particularly attendance, participation rates, and engaging in pathways. That I will stand firm on. We need to ground our measurements in what students know and are able to do, not whether or not they're able to sign up for a class or attend a class.
So can you help me? Is there a measurement in there that checks that box for you, or no?
So yes, completion of JROTC with a C or higher identifies what a student knows or is able to do based on coursework requirements. Enrolling in a program does not tell me whether or not a student
Is graduation or not?
Graduation, yes, there are,
That does.
yeah.
And I want to be clear, the CTE pathway is that they've successfully completed three, I believe it's 3 semesters. I'd have to actually pull the measure. So it's not just signing up to be a part of that or to be in a class. There is a measure of success along with it.
So it's passing 3 semesters of coursework.
Let me get that actual.
Or a certain number.
Yeah, it's a
That's
certain
a
number,
yes.
yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Tasha Brown.
So the attendance piece and you had mentioned attendance and participation in, and I'm sorry, we did have this listed, and I'm not seeing it in my previous documentation.
There was an AP coursework one. Is completion of
So-
credentials the same as CTE?
That was one of the, completion of credentials was one that's on the possible list.
Oh,
But
completion
we
of
don't
FAFSA,
currently
I think
track.
Yeah, okay.
Dr. Roberts, this is Pat. Can you tell me, or again, sort of give me an indication of the discussion around this goal? It feels like our work around this has to start well before high school in order to embed the idea of career readiness and completion of some of these things for the, that I'm sort of mulling around the spirit of the goal in my head, and our indicators are in high school. Should we be monitoring something before high school in order to indicate whether we've got kids on the right track before they get there?
The answer is yes, and we have already started to do that work under the leadership of Tasha Brown and team. So yes, you're absolutely right. In order for us to, certainly in the future, to truly get to the desired outcomes, we need to start as early as our elementary schools. But I know that we have a program that looks at our future-ready pursuits pathways that starts at least at the middle school level. So yes, it's going to be a district-wide or system-wide approach.
And I don't want to put my colleague on the spot here, but Skylar, this feels like an area where you might be able to provide some insight. Anything that comes off the top of your head that would be a good indicator to Kim's point about something kids know or can do in high school that's a good indicator of career readiness or what we're trying to accomplish here? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I've been thinking about this one as well. One of the things that comes to mind initially is the work around durable skills. And I'm not sure how the district measures that, if it's currently being measured or not. But I do think some kind of an interim goal around durable skills being embedded would be a strong indicator of particularly the employee part of the enroll employee enlist framework.
I suspect if I look at your CTE pathways, there's going to be some weak ones out there.
Skylar, what's a durable skill?
The durable skills, it's a national framework that outlines it, but those are the skills that are most in demand by employers. There were, I believe, 10 that were indicated to be skills that were in demand by employers that connect directly to success of those coming straight into the workforce, primarily those early career talent professionals.
Thank you.
These have gone by any number of names, by the way. You're thinking things like communication, critical thinking, problem solving, things like that.
Oh.
And
Yes.
as a point of information, that's a focus, as a matter of fact, of the team around the Future Ready work. So.
This is Jackie. I know I was kind of choppy. Just to follow up on the question that Patrick asked. So are we contemplating an interim goal connected to middle school?
So based on the board's request at this point for us to come back with 2 more interims in this measure, we can work on identifying something that may be captured in middle school.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just gonna say, I think this is where the staff and Tasha Brown really, it would be helpful to understand the indicators that are both measurable, but also show forward movement earlier than high school, if those things exist.
Thank you. We will come back with interim goals that gets us to that place for earlier grades.
I hear the board saying that, and I hear the staff trying to be collaborative. I severely doubt the most predictive indicators are going to be in middle school or elementary school. If your intention is to measure enrollment, employment, enlistment, I'm almost certain that your most predictive measures are all going to be high school measures, not middle school or elementary measures. They will almost certainly fall off in predictive power as you get lower in grade and increase in predictive power as you get higher in grade. And so remember, board, this task for staff with the interims is to come up with things that really help you understand, are we moving in the direction of accomplishing the goal? So when they dig into this and they come up, mine, a group of 20 possible, some that are in elementary, some in middle, some in high, I would almost guarantee that the ones that have the strongest predictive power are going to be ones in high school, not in middle or elementary. I say that only to suggest that if that is important to you, then you all need to take appropriate action. But I would not be counting on there being middle school or elementary school interim goals for this particular goal.
So AJ, what I think I'm hearing you say is there may be inputs and things that happen in middle school that puts a young person on a pathway to accomplish the future ready goal.
Yes.
Okay, but it's an input.
So for example, 8th graders completing algebra, textbook. However, if I was going to compare that with the predictive capacity of a similar measure in 10th grade, it'd probably still have more predictive power than the 8th grade.
Well, and for that same reason, I'm gonna push, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm being really pushy tonight. On behalf of children. On interim goal 3A, 9th graders earning 1 core credit does not, certainly it's predictive of future readiness, but 1 credit, I don't think it's any credit in a core course?
It's 1 credit in
No,
each
one
of
in
the
each.
4 course, in each of the
One in
4
each.
course areas.
Okay,
So
I
they've
read
got
that
4
that
down
way
right
too.
away.
I was like, oh
okay,
man.
thank you for clarifying.
But that really, I mean,
I still think it's incredibly sad to see that number as our current state. Go ahead, Jackie.
no, I appreciate how hard this is to measure, so I want to say that. I think what I'm hearing is that we're accepting this state framework for future ready Iowa indicators. And I say that with a tad bit of a question, but I think that's the case. And some of the things that I felt like were part of our conversation of what we heard from the community was a little bit more vibrant than this. And yet I knew you have to start somewhere, but it just felt a little bit more vibrant than maybe some of the measurement recommendations that are taking place.
And I will say we started with the things that we already collect. So yes, I won't disagree with you. They are, the things that we already collect are by definition status quo. That's where we are, that's where we're starting. I think, at least my understanding from Dr. Roberts' direction, is that this is not necessarily the forever location. This is where we start so that we can begin monitoring it and begin having discussions around it and having focus around it, and that the intent is for it to grow as we collect better data.
it's not even close to where we intend to be in terms of our aspiration. Look, Board, I think it's important to also understand that we have at least the foundations of the infrastructure in term programmatically as well as the personnel. Certainly, there may be opportunities for us to add personnel, but while I have tremendous excitement around each of our three goals, this is one that I know has a tremendous amount of potential. It's going to require every person who's in a position of governance and leadership to sort of have this healthy balance between boldly moving forward towards achieving this, as well as being patient, because we are navigating a very new space. But it's one that has been done in many places around the country. So just boldness and patience.
So Dr. Roberts,
So,
oh, pues. Jackie, is that you?
no, I think it was Hannah.
Anna?
Josie, just a quick question. Are we able to trace or get information from like who's applied for FAFSA, things like that, to help with that goal?
That is on our list of potential future measures to start collecting on a more systemic.
Not about what students know or are able to do.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Kim's in my head going, that's not what kids know.
All right, Madam Vice Chair.
I was,
I did have a question. Oh, sorry.
did somebody else have another question? Skylar, was that you?
Yes, I did. I had
Go ahead.
a comment actually around potentially an interim goal, and just one thing I wanted to be mindful of when it comes to the enroll, employ, and enlist is that specific targeted populations aren't ending up on the employ and enlist demographic versus the enroll. I do see that within industry that it almost sometimes the latter two serve as an alternative versus as a complement or as a wraparound to their education. So I don't know how that could potentially be measured within an interim goal or considered, but I would like to see that to be mindful that underrepresented populations aren't showing up in spaces where enlist and employ are alternatives to enroll versus complements to enroll.
So that is currently not captured in the language of the goal. So if the board feels like that is something important to capture, you would need to demonstrate leadership by figuring out how to capture that in your goal. But in the absence of that being captured, that is absolutely one of several significant weaknesses of the way that the goal is currently written. And when I say weaknesses, I'm definitely certain that there are weaknesses in this goal. That doesn't mean it's the wrong one, but you just need to go in eyes open that that is one of the potential weaknesses of it. Another potential weakness of this, which your staff member has hinted at you, is that in the future ready indicators, there is some really weak data that I would not encourage you all to rely upon. And so either the board needs to have that conversation about the areas of weakness and spend some more time thinking this through, what the goal might be with your staff, or ask your superintendent, can you please spend some time with this with your staff and come back to us with a version of this that's strengthened against some of the weaknesses that we've lifted up. I think either of those are appropriate. The board can take the next stab at trying to ameliorate those, or you can ask your staff to do so. I think that's up to you all to decide where to go next. But you all have lifted up some very real weaknesses with this. And either you accept that, yeah, those are weaknesses, but this is still the right goal and we should proceed. And I'm not trying to dissuade you from it. That may well and is probably the correct answer. Or it may be that there is a stronger version that you all would prefer that would help clarify some of the questions you've been asking.
I was just going to say that, in our discussion, I keep hearing the word bold, and I really would like to encourage us to maybe do a little bit of that in this goal. So it was mentioned that this is being done, right, around the country, and future ready indicators. What are people doing? What's successful? And I know that it's something that is new for the district, but I feel like, we really owe it to students. We're talking about high school students. How can we do more? How can we just be more bold in this goal, in this interim? And I know we're going to have two more interims.
So are you thinking about where it says that we'll get to 41.5% by June of 2027? Are you thinking that that should be a higher percentage of students, or are you thinking of bold in another capacity?
I think it struck me, Kim's comment about one credit. And while there was clarification that that's not necessarily the case, still, I feel like students are very capable of doing more. And so can we, yes, I mean, if the percentage can change, how can we raise the bar for our students? Because they are truly capable. And I feel like in this interim, we're saying, we're going to start low because we're going to play it safe because we haven't done it. And to me, that tells me that we're not really believing in students.
Well, Maria, I might say it a different way, and this is just my feedback. I feel like we are using a framework. Like, I kind of want to know, what's our vision? What's the DMPS vision for Future Ready Iowa? Because is this our vision, or is this somebody else's vision? Because that really does help better connect to whether we measured it or not. What are the pillars of our investment? So do we have a and please, when I'm using these words, I know Tasha has a big vision and the district is very engaged in our work with Central Campus, but have we articulated exactly the components of what that vision for a DMPS student is, given the fact that we have a lot of things that other school districts don't have, right? Because we have Central Campus, because we have access to a lot of credentials and programs that a lot of other districts don't. So that is also a question that I'm looking to have answered as well.
Madam Chair, yes, we are happy to come back to the board with an articulated vision for what Future Ready looks like in the Mountain Public Schools.
Right. And ideally, to Kim's point, is it measured with data, or can it be measured with data, and therefore is it a new measurement? Should that be something that is possible?
And can I just follow up on that question? I was thinking about what you were saying, AJ, and to when we crafted this goal, you sort of cautioned around, we had a very long conversation around the enlist portion of this and how you have seen in other districts students sort of being pushed into certain or because all we're looking at is a total number. So how do we get that granular data to be able to evaluate what portion of students are in the enlist versus employ, enroll, enroll, and how can we really use it to sort of look at, to be aware of those possible pitfalls that we know other people around the nation have fallen into?
Yeah, and I want to be clear, when we use that language of employ, enroll, enlist, and I'm sure Tasha can speak to this even better than I can, that summary list, almost everything falls across all three categories. With the sole, like there being basically one differentiator for each of them. With the kind of understanding that each of those pieces are indicators of success, regardless of what you do, and instead about generalized success, if that makes sense. So the categorization of them was really more about making it more bite-sized as opposed to a clear indication of the vision.
So if there's only one thing that is setting them apart, all of these 85% or higher attendance, graduation, college credit, dual credit course, FAFSA completion, and work-based learning participation, that is in all three. Why wouldn't those all essentially nullify each other? Why wouldn't we just look at the three that are identifying if someone is going to enroll, this is the indicator for success. If someone's going to enlist, this is the indicator for success.
My understanding when we started this process was that we were looking for a more broad measure of post-secondary readiness as opposed to specifically enrollment, enlistment, employment. And so I think maybe there's some confusion or conflation between the language of the framework that we use to help organize as opposed to the actual vision.
Can you say that again, Josie? So you were understanding that the definition of future ready
is about post-secondary readiness, that many of these indicators, that each of these indicators meets. And to be, so in the actual measure itself, a student could be a CTE pathway concentrator and have that level of ability, or not ability, I apologize, that level of coursework and coursework completion, and an AP course with a C or higher, and graduation, and the seal of biliteracy. We didn't categorize them as, this number of students are in the enrollment category, this number of students are in the enlistment category, this number of students are in the employment category. Those categories all work together to get to that final number. Does that?
Yes, thank you, Tasha Brown, for joining us. Certainly wanted to bring in our resident expert, person whose tutelage we are all on as a part of this collaborative, to just offer and lend any additional finer points, because I really appreciate the questions the board is asking and the manner in which you are sort of challenging our mental model around what future ready looks like. So, yeah.
So I just want to be transparent that I'm entering this discussion as a school leader 10 years into my administrative career, learning about the board goal process. And I too personally have been grappling with the difference between the vision, right, and the framework and the work that we know that needs to be done. That to me is very much about pushing the system forward, disrupting things, and then what actually needs to happen in terms of making your processes, right, work within your governance model. So I'm very novice at all of this. But the way that we were approaching this, because I too felt the same way, and we've had those conversations about these measurements are very status quo. And so for somebody that didn't understand all the things, which I've learned so much from you, so thank you. With that is that we did approach this under the guise too that we cannot add any measurement that we don't have that current data for yet. And I know that there was discussion about we could start at zero with some things, but it's really those things that really limited us, because we have had things in motion either right before the pandemic or certainly after the pandemic that we're now only in our second year, or we lost, data for, that I think that we could get at to some of the points that have been lifted up here around, is this about what students know and able to do? Or, Skylar's point too about is this more of a wraparound around enroll is being the center. And I just think that there's just more philosophical conversations that also need to happen. I just think that there truly is a lack of understanding around the vision of this and what that is. So, I think we're certainly willing to continue to engage in those conversations so that there can be a little bit more clarity and understanding around what is currently happening in service of this before it became a board goal, because this work isn't new. It's been going on for quite some time. It's also not about Central Campus, and it's not just about CTE, and it's also just not about high school. And so that's where some of the things that we're seeing in this process is conflicting with the intent and the whole purpose behind the work. So there is a rub there. How we navigate that, I'm certainly not the person to give suggestions on that, but I can certainly allocate time, my time, services, my team's time and services to bringing more things forward. Just, we were very limited by that 3-year data at the student level. That's what drove a lot of the conversations around the numbers that you're currently seeing and discussing tonight.
Thank you,
So
Dr.
I was just going to say, and Dr. Roberts, I think you and I briefly touched on this. It feels like there's a missing piece, and that's the strategic vision and, quite honestly, the strategic plan for what we're trying to accomplish as a district around what called Future Ready Iowa and Rural West. Like, that whole piece is missing, and if that's going to happen in the strategic planning process, are there accountabilities to make sure that the strategic planning process is moving forward so we end up with a vision that we are then better apt to understand and budget accordingly and measure? And I don't know if that means not measuring this year. I don't love that idea, but I do want to just ask that question, since we heard this loud and clear. This is the number one thing our community wants. And I'm a little worried that we're not spending enough time on the big stuff, the big vision first.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Certainly acknowledging the worry that you're expressing. Let me push in that. Given the fact that we're starting at year 0 with this goal, I think we want to start with our focus on 2 areas. One, making sure that we have the right brain trust in place, so having the right personnel to lead and drive this work. And then secondly, recognizing that we have to create, at least at a high level, a vision for what Future Ready looks like. I've already heard lots of conversations and discussions about this over the last 9 or 10 months that I've been here. And so this is going to become an integral part of our 5-year strategic planning work that will get started next month. And so, yes, I think you're absolutely right. So hopefully we can alleviate a little bit of that worry that you're feeling when we come back to the board with a little bit more strategic direction once we start to insert this into the 5-year plan.
And I do think that within our mission statement, to add to that, if I may,
sure.
Our mission statement for our district is about making sure that students have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful in the next stage of their lives. So even with the numbers or the language as it stands, part of the biggest intent is that we need to have a goal to measure how students are matriculating into the next stage of their lives and what parts of our K-12 system, specifically in Des Moines Public Schools, have contributed to students accessing and matriculating into whatever those pathways are. So I think, there also just needs to be some clarity around what are we centering this on and around. And we've had this mission statement for a very long time, So hopefully it will fill the gap of we've had a mission statement, but maybe we haven't had a vision for what that looks like. And to me, this is really kind of like giving the green, by having this be a board goal, it's about giving the green light for us to start, really formulating and prioritizing our work at all levels, from, the superintendent's office down throughout the organization around what we have said that our mission statement is. But again, we're limited by data that we haven't collected that we are now knowing that we do need to collect. And to me, I respectfully just disagree that some of these measures that are within the profiles aren't about what students know and can do, because it's the academic suite and the academic programming and the experiences that they're having within our academics that leads them to not only knowing what the next stage of their life is for them based on their desires, right? But that they actually have access because they are well-trained with what students know and are able to do. And participating in CTE pathways, there is a database behind that shows that there's an improvement on attendance. There's a strong correlation with higher graduation rates and those things. So there is a basis and a science behind those indicators in terms of persistence and matriculation to post-secondary pathways and options.
I think a recommendation I heard from Jackie some time ago was for the superintendent to take another run at this. Again, it's the board's call whether the board takes the next run at this or whether you ask the superintendent team to, that's you all's call. But I think I heard Jackie ask for the, at least her interest is if the superintendent could. Whichever way you go, whether it's the board or the superintendent that takes the next crack at this, based on what I'm hearing, my coaching, start from a blank sheet of paper and articulate what is the DMPS vision for future-ready students. I think what brought us to where we're at is you all had a conversation at the very first retreat that we did on this process about this particular topic. And I think you all indexed around the Future Ready Iowa indicators for two reasons. They already existed, and so it's easily measurable, and it would create some alignment so it'd be more clear for the community to understand. Now I hear you all moving in a very different direction, saying, we'd be willing to sacrifice that alignment and clarity with the state in lieu of having something that more clearly is representative of us as distinct from the state. If that's the direction you want to go, again, either the board can take the next stab or the superintendent can, but whoever takes the next stab, I recommend scrapping the state as a starting point and starting with a blank sheet of paper as a starting point and building up what are the indicators that for us are student outcomes that describe what a future-ready DMPS graduate looks like.
And I would recommend the superintendent and Tasha Brown and the team work on it. I would only ask if there are clarifying questions that they would like to ask, or do they feel like they've received sufficient feedback?
Is the board's preference at this point for us to return with something that would be essentially a 0th year, where we don't have 3 years of data, but would have more information, or to continue in the model where we've been in, where we need 3 years of data in order to build that out? Just because that's going to guide which direction we can go with that idea generation and with that profile.
I would say new measures with zeros.
Okay, that's what
I agree, but I would also push my board colleagues to widen our gaze about what students know and can do. We just heard from an expert who is telling us that there are good indicators, and I think we should listen to her guidance about this particular topic and learn more about what a good measure looks like for this, for our ultimate goal. So I guess I would not limit us to the literal, what do they know, what can they do from a testing standpoint, or from a, that is very measurable. But I think maybe in this case, because this is new territory, we need to widen our definition a little bit in order to accomplish our goal.
My concern, Pat, if we do that, is the unintended consequences that come along with allowing some of these indicators that are not about what students know and are able to do. And for example, FAFSA completion, it then becomes a check mark on a checkbox to get us to reaching the board goal. And I'm not saying that that would occur, but in an effort for during monitoring to get us to an on-track basis, we've got a bunch of indicators that could just become check boxes, check marks and check boxes, rather than truly, are my students ready? Or are we just getting them to sign up for something, or having a participation rate, or, I don't want to be giving away participation trophies. I want to be truly making sure students are ready. And there are always going to be unintended consequences of our goals and guardrails, always. We have to be mindful of what those are. And here, I think we are opening a door for ones that are going to be detrimental to our students.
So good, like, I think your point is well taken. And so I think our job is to thread the needle, because what we're talking about is a cultural shift here in making sure our students, it's not just about putting them into a class and having them perform. It is about a complete mindset shift from the time they get into school to the time they get out of school, about how we are allowing them to be prepared for their future, but how they are taking hold of their future. That's also what preparation for your future is about, is how are they taking hold of these things. And I hear you, Kim. I think that's exactly right. And I agree with you. What I'm saying is, I think there is a nuance to that that also will, should be included in this, and that we shouldn't be relying on check boxes for sure. But I think there's some of this that's about getting our students into the mindset from the time they're in kindergarten to the time they're seniors in high school. What does my future look like, and how am I going to build that for myself?
Staff, do you have any other questions that you need to ask the board?
Not at this time, no.
My next question would be about timeline, but we can talk about that later.
Then board, I would pull your attention back to a meta question that Jenna suggested you come back to. Are there any particular modifications that a board member wants to recommend regarding the endpoints of any of these three goals? Right now, they're set at 65%, 55%, and 41.5% respectively. Previously, it sounded like there was some interest in modifying any of those. Now that you've looked at all three proposed goals, I'm bringing that back to the table before we move on to guardrails.
I would like to ask my board colleagues to consider seeking feedback from Dr. Roberts on goal 1 and what it would mean to try and get us to a number beyond 65%, and is it realistic? Two separate issues. One is a budgetary issue. The second is an accomplishment issue. So I would be interested in hearing that if other board members are interested. I feel like we have dug in hard on literacy. That is the goal that we are keeping and solidly behind. And I think we should understand if we're doing everything we possibly can this year.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with Jackie on that. I mean, literacy, just looking at what's been going on in the last couple of years, I think we really need to push and give it all that we can and look at the different goals or different options and budget.
Staff, do you have a response?
No, it seems like a very clear charge. Happy to have that discussion with the board.
Does anyone want to propose, either staff or board, is there a proposed, right now it says 65, is there another proposition?
I don't feel like I know enough to make a proposition. I feel like it would be helpful to understand what bold, we've heard a lot about being bold, but I don't think we've actually heard anything beyond the science of reading. And GLEAM, which are more frameworks, not people. And so, I mean, I could say a number, but I don't feel like it's informed by any data.
So I heard staff earlier indicate that the data you brought back reflected one particular degree of boldness. I didn't know if staff had specific thoughts about this.
The 20 to 40 points meaning high and the above 40 meaning aggressive. Is that what you're referring to, AJ?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, if the board's direction is to look at a more aggressive model, I would want to go back and actually model that out to what it would look like to go beyond that 40 points per student to an average, a higher average student change over time, and look at it from that lens.
And is it say that you can't really look at that without understanding the resources that Dr. Roberts is recommending we put towards that goal? Like those two things should come in parallel, shouldn't they?
Yes.
They will. Yes, thank you.
And I can't read the room, so I don't want to push this point if there's not at least four board members who support that.
I support that.
I would
I support it as well.
be interested in knowing if there are, yeah, I was gonna say, I would be interested in knowing if there are other constraints that are limiting the ability to be bold. I know we talked about one being capital, but are there other constraints potentially such as time, or other indicators that might be an issue, to moving more boldly that maybe we're not considering?
There are no constraints. Thank you for the question, or wondering to being bold. We just have to do it. We have to disrupt the status quo and make sure that we're committing to engaging in practices in a way that allows us to refine what we're currently doing and build upon the processes we have in place. One place for us to start around this idea of being bold is exactly what Josie just articulated. We're going to go back, model a very different model, so to speak, around that gets us to this place of an aggressive target. Come back to the board with our recommendations around resource reallocation that aligns to exactly what we're sharing with the board. And it sounds as if the board has an appetite and desire to really align with the district around being bold and, again, really amplifying this belief that our students are capable. We just have to go forward and being bold. So yes, let's do it.
And I think I personally would like to also know what we're sacrificing by doing that. I still support it, but I heard AJ say earlier, you have to be willing to take from something or somewhere, right, and move it around. So what are we losing where, and who is that affecting?
And unfortunately, you won't know that when you adopt your goals. This is the nature of goal setting, is you cast a vision, and then later on you figure out what does the vision cost you. So the normal way that these things progress is the board sets the goals, the superintendent sets the interim goals, and then the superintendent goes and creates the strategic plan based on that. And so the answer to your question doesn't come until the strategic planning phase, where then you actually see what the trade-offs are. So essentially, you are making a decision in the next few weeks without knowing what will the exact implications be. And so that should have an impact on your willingness to be bold, recognizing that there is some unknown element to it, currently unknown, that won't be known until later. And if you can't handle that, then you should scale back. If you can handle that, then you should feel comfortable scaling forward.
I guess I don't understand that. Sorry, I'm trying to get my head around the comment you just made around a strategic plan. So literacy has been our goal. So are you saying, I'm not getting it, because this goal starts in July. And so how long are we, I think what you're saying, if I'm hearing you, is you don't know what you're impacting or what the consequences are of your decision. Well, if some of them are bodies, it's human capacity, you should be in a position to understand that. If Dr. Roberts is saying to pay for this, you got to do this. Maybe I'm not understanding what you just said.
Yes, I don't think you should expect to know all the details of what exact system changes will be required to accomplish your goals at the time you adopt your goals. That is not a reasonable expectation to have. Is that only as you get into the implementation. So for example, I suspect right now your organization is not organized around the principle of getting to 75% of your fourth graders being proficient or advanced by 2027. I suspect that is not the case. So if you all came back and said, that's what we're going to do, the superintendent is going to, only after he knows that, will he then have some insights into, okay, what will we have to do to accomplish that? And then after he knows that, then you have to figure out, well, how much resources do we have to accomplish those things and what's the delta? And then only after he knows that will he know where are viable places to try to find that amount of delta. And only then can he come back to you and say, okay, in order to execute on the goal you set, here is the changes. But that is several steps away from anything that you will know on the day that you adopt the goals.
And AJ, maybe I'm just misunderstanding. There's a difference between adopting the goals and the interims. Is that correct?
So you will not, so yeah, you all don't adopt the interims. Our coaching to you is do not adopt the goals until you have accepted the interims that the superintendent has put forward. And so if there's some concern about some of the interims this evening, then you all aren't ready to adopt the goals. I would continue workshopping this and getting your superintendent to calibrate with the board. And only once you're in calibration, you all have goals that you're comfortable with, and the superintendent has come up with interims that you're comfortable with, then and only then do we recommend, okay, at that point, you can now vote to adopt your goals and guardrails.
Thank you.
I just wanted to have my board colleagues do a time check. It's 8 o'clock. And so are we going through guardrails as well still this evening? What's a path to proceed?
So let me rattle off the consensus I've heard so far and see if this is accurate. So far, the consensus I've heard is that the board wants the superintendent and his team to take a second run at goal number 1 to try to identify how much more aggressive can that goal possibly be that the superintendent would recommend and willingly stand behind. Generally speaking, the board seemed comfortable with the interims, with the 1 asterisk around the 3rd interim, that if there's time to move the needle in 2 months, then it just needs to be consistent that that's always the case. What I heard from the board is general consensus around goal number 2 as it exists, with only the 1 asterisk around goal 2C. And I heard from the board that there's a desire to have the superintendent take another run at goal number 3 with an emphasis on what do we as a school system say future ready looks like, even if it is not in sync with what Iowa says future ready looks like, and then provide 3 interim goals for that. That is the consensus I've heard so far. Have I heard correctly?
I believe that.
Yes.
If the board is comfortable with that, I think you've handled your obligation for goals for this evening. I would recommend either you decide to do guardrails another evening, or we proceed with guardrails and see how far we can get in the next hour. Board, what say you?
Madam Chair?
I think it's valuable to have AJ in person. And even if it means that we need to move the closed session and potentially seek an all virtual option, I think it's valuable to have AJ in person, but I welcome other feedback.
I am fine with that, but I'm going to start probably boarding a plane here in about 10 minutes to go back to Des Moines. So I'm going to bow out here in a few minutes, but if you guys want to go ahead with the guardrails.
Thank you.
Can I take a restroom break?
Yes.
Oh, we definitely, yeah.
I say we do guardrails and take advantage of AJ being here.
So are we coming back, Madam Vice Chair?
So
So 5 minutes?
I think that we need to take a quick break.
And I'm just going to voice that I think that all board members need to be present for this.
For the guardrails?
Yes, I think it's important that this is done by the full board and the full governing body.
I do kind of agree with Kim, and I feel like while AJ's here in person, the majority of the board is not, and it's different when you guys are in the room. It is just different. And so especially as we're getting into the importance of our guardrails around the culture and culture of climate of our district and the values of our community, I have to agree with Kim. This is not a great experience to have you all not here.
You want to try to,
I think we reschedule and then,
another option next Tuesday? Do you all have a meeting next Tuesday? The 23rd?
We have,
We don't.
Do you want one?
Well, I think we are excited to get to the end. I think if people can commit to the 23rd, we should do it. So I can do it. I guess I'm wondering how other people are doing. Patrick would be virtual. Skylar?
I'm supportive. Yes, I'm supportive of the 23rd, and I would be in person.
I'd come back.
Okay.
Anna, is she already boarded her plane to Paris?
No, I'm coming back. I'm coming in the morning.
Oh,
No, the 23rd, I am open.
perfect.
Patrick?
He'll be virtual.
He's virtual. He'll be the only one virtual.
Dr. Roberts, team? We'll have to,
Josie, we may have to phone her in from the hospital.
Yeah.
I think the majority
you.
then will
Kaylee's
be
going to be here.
in person.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Okay, then we move the meeting for the 23rd.
sorry, Josie. Know that you don't have to ever put yourself in discomfort on our behalf.
On the 23rd, next Tuesday.
Sorry.
Madam Vice Chair?
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion tonight. I think we need a brief break before we come back. So let's take maybe 10 minutes? No, let's come back at 8:20. Would that be okay?
May I?
So are we
Yeah.
coming back at 8:20 for a closed session, or are we coming back at 8:20? We're coming back at 8:20 for a closed session then, right? Because we're moving
Correct.
guardrails to, okay.
Correct. We're moving our conversation about our guardrails to the 23rd, and we're going to take a break, and we'll come back to do our closed session.
Got it.
Can you join the second link, please?
10-4, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back at 8:20.